Hello there, welcome to the Firewatch audio tour. My name is Rich Summer. I voiced the character of Henry, the guy that you're currently controlling with those buttons there. And I'll be chatting with you in a little bit. Thanks for checking it out.
Hi, I'm Sean Vanneman. I wrote the bulk of 100% of this game.
Hey, I'm Jake Rodkin. I did a lot of level design, UI design, and worked with everyone on the story for Firewatch.
The game has this weird structure that Chris and I talk about in another tape. This is the first thing I wrote, was this opening of the game that jumps between Henry's life and the trip out to the woods. And I used a little product called Twine to do that, which you can download and use. It's just a very simple choose-your-own-adventure tool. The simplest way to program a video game that one can then share with friends and play.
I think we were worried that the team would sort of perceive Henry as a blank slate, as sort of a generic game player protagonist, and we wanted to make sure, or we wanted to get in everyone's mindset, you're playing as a specific guy with a specific life.
Yeah, there's a reason when you play video games that a lot of your protagonists have amnesia, because it's really difficult when you're driving a character around who knows things about their life, or his or her life, that you, who you ostensibly are that person, don't know. So, yeah, we kept trying to write an opening of the game that happened sort of like weeks into Henry's experience, and then quickly realized that it was like, well, why would he not be able to say X? Well, because his relationship with his wife is Y. So, but the player doesn't know that. Yeah. And this was the quickest way to get everybody on board, was to just take the thing that I wrote that answered the question, I think, for Jane and you at the beginning, which was like, who is Henry? And I would write these character profiles that were really bad. And then I went, what if I just let you play a thing? And then you can figure out who he is. And we held on to that until we had the idea to put into the game.
It means that when you're playing Firewatch and Henry and Delilah start talking about Henry's wife, you don't have to learn it through his dialogue, because you made the choices that brought him where he is today. Hi, it's Jake again.
Hey, I'm Chris Remo.
Oh, hey, Chris.
Hi there. I was a game designer and the music composer on Firewatch.
Nice.
So you're hearing now the first piece of interactive music that went into Firewatch. The first piece of music that actually
responds to what you're doing in the game?
Exactly, yeah. So this is a piece of music that's divided into technically 6 parts. And what's happening is, as you're playing through this introductory sequence, when you hit certain points in the narrative, it sends a signal to Wise, which is the name of the audio middleware we're using. And then when Wise gets that signal, it waits until the next sort of musically appropriate transition point, and then when it hits that, it smoothly transitions into the next section of music. And so it creates the effect that you're just listening to one big long piece of music that just happens to be timed very nicely to your playthrough.
It just happens to get sadder and sadder at the exact rate that your life gets sadder and sadder.
Yeah, exactly. This was a challenging process, both because I had no idea what the music should sound like, and also because it was the first interactive piece of music in the game. So the technical sort of just how does this work was also a part of it. But as it turned out, this music was changed. I mean, Jake, you may remember this. This music changed relatively little over the course of development in comparison to a lot of.
I think it started off as maybe 3 pieces and it expanded out to 5 over development. But other than that, it's one of the first things dropped in, shipped. Get ready to hear about that a lot on this commentary.
I'm Nels Anderson, and I was a designer and gameplay programmer on Firewatch.
I am Jane Ng, and I worked on the 3D environment art in Firewatch.
So you're likely standing at the base of your home away from home. Your home in the wilderness. For all intents and purposes, more or less, this is basically just a real straight-up tower like they existed out in the woods, right?
Yeah, I think it is Portland. There's somebody in Portland who was very good about archiving a lot of blueprints about various type of fire lookouts of the state, and we got some, and that's how we started off building the the lookout tower, just by looking through how they were actually built.
It's slightly taller than a real one, right?
We had to make quite a bit of adjustments because, for example, the stairway you see here, normally fire lookout stairways are not on the outside, but for more interesting gameplay and views for the player, we opted to change that. But ultimately we still wanted the tower to feel like a real tower, so we had to figure stuff like, hey, how does the plumbing actually work? How do they get water? Stuff like that. It actually is very important for a real tower.
And if you go look around the base of the tower, you will actually see a big old plastic cistern.
We are not a survival game of any sort, but it is important to make sure that all that stuff is actually thought out, so the space feels realistic.
Right. You don't want someone playing the game being like, wait a minute, there's no how does this guy drink? How is he not dead?
When I normally play video games, I'm always interested in stuff like, hey, where's the bathroom? Here we have the outhouse and you can go anywhere, but stuff like water is very important. So in a real fire lookout situation, what they do is they will use a cistern, and they will capture rainwater from the roof, and you will actually see that we actually have a little pipe down from the roof, and we even have what they call a first flush filter being there, which is actually what they use.
That's my favorite kind of filter, really.
Yeah, I had to look at what do they do, because once you go, okay, you collect rainwater from the roof, it won't be all nasty, and then hey, somebody already figured that out on how to collect rainwater. What do you know?
We actually visited a number of different lookout towers as we were researching the game, and it was always very satisfying to see elements of things we saw in the real world and make their way back into the game, and vice versa.
So we also made sure to have a tab here, a little faucet, where you can actually get water from the cistern.
Yeah, if you click on it, it will play an animation of a hand gripping a knob and water comes out for 2 seconds. Doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But it's there.
I think for a while we actually were thinking, should we just let the player turn on the water? Or then what happens if the water just runs out? And then James had a very good idea of just going just make one animation that you turn on the faucet and turn it off immediately, just so that hey, there's water in here and you won't die. That's Henry.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
This is the Osborne Firefinder, invented in 1914 by W.B.
Osborne?
You use this to spot...
Nels, it feels like you on the team did the most sort of digging about what the real job is like, what is in the actual space, and then checked us against reality when we kind of went off the reservation.
In general, I really like doing research. That's sort of a thing I've enjoyed on all the projects I've worked on. So for this, a bunch of folks on the team read this great book called Fire Season by Philip Connors, which is kind of like a memoir-ish thing from this dude who still is an active fire lookout even today. But I also I called up the Ministry of Forests and Natural Resources here in British Columbia and got redirected to 3 increasingly small Ministry of Forest offices until someone just gave me literally the phone number of this cool old lady who had once been a fire lookout. So I just kind of chatted with her for an hour and a half just about what doing the job was like. The reason why the game is not a simulation of being a fire lookout is because what everyone talks about is that the number one challenge with the job is that it is incredibly, impossibly boring.
Because you can't read a book, you can't be doing other things, right?
Not really.
Yeah.
At the end of day 3, where Delilah mentions Kenny's well, what do I do for the rest of the summer? She's you sit in that chair and you look out the window. That is actually what fire lookouts really do. So all the folks I talked to said figuring out ways to combat boredom is the number one thing. The lady I talked to, she said she did a whole lot of needlepoint and cross stitch because you can do that without looking at your hands very much. Obviously, like, lookouts are also responsible for doing, maintenance on their towers. But again, it's like not maintenance because some crazy Yahoo smashed up your tower. It's maintenance like, oh, the paint is kind of flaking off, better paint it. Or these trees have grown too tall, so I need to chop them down. Not, I'm chopping down trees to form a weird log bridge.
The main takeaway from whenever we would talk to someone who had done this job is, why would you make a game about that? That is the most boring time of my entire life. So hopefully we showed them how.
It feels like people who do this job like fall into two camps, right? They're the people who think they can do it and can't hack it and bail after like a month or two. People like Jack Kerouac, who tried to do this and wrote about it in Desolation Angels, and then he went crazy from a lack of cigarettes and then left. Or the people who kind of enjoy the solitude and then figure out ways to deal with it. But, we do have like a lot of the window dressing for the stuff people use. Like other folks I talk to, it's like, what do you do? Well, we read a lot of books, and we like trade the books between the different lookouts through rangers and stuff like that. So of course, Firewatch has a crap ton of weird books in it. Stuff like that.
Hi there, it's Jake.
And Chris again.
Hey, so here we are in the cache box clearing, or at least I guess that's what we call it. There's a lot of cache boxes in Firewatch, but this was the first one that we placed into the game.
For a long time, this was the cache box.
It was the cache box, even though we knew we wanted to have more. This area was actually one of the first areas that we've built out to any degree that looks like a piece of the world. It was a really good proving ground for us. Like, when me and Nels Anderson were grayboxing the world at the very beginning, we tried a million different things. Like, maybe this was on the edge of a cliff, or maybe it was a secret that you had to find. And I think it was Sean who suggested that he really wanted it to feel like a warm, sort of enclosed space, like you've stumbled onto a little glen and you want to stay there for a while, which I think makes sense because we wanted people to actually stop and poke around and have it not feel like the woods.
This was an area with a lot of firsts. I remember this really ended up looking a lot like Ollie's concept art in a way I think that felt like an accomplishment when it all got built out. It was also the first audio I implemented in the entire game, I believe.
The Foley on the locks and the lid?
Right, exactly.
Oh, this was, man, this was also, the cache box was also our proving ground for detailed object interaction with Henry animating the lock. And also, there is an exit out if you back up and turn left. That was the first time I prototyped one-way drops and also any like sort of secret paths, because the way that you cross the canyon also showed up here, and I didn't tell anyone on the team about it for like months, and people only noticed it once they started playing the back half of the game, and it was very fulfilling for me.
Nice.
Cache box.
Cache box, land of firsts and secrets.
That's the state flag of cache boxes.
Hey, there's a tree out here that's been ripped to hell.
And?
Don't you think that's, disconcerting?
Henry, there are 500-pound grizzly bears out here. They sharpen their claws on trees.
We don't have grizzlies in Colorado. People killed them a long time ago.
Well, in the thoroughfare, they hunt people.
Jake.
Oh, hey, Sean.
You did a neat thing here in the game that I like a lot, which is when you make a dialogue choice with Delilah about what this this dangerous hill should be called. It shows up on your map, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, when we were putting the map system together, well, actually, the map weirdly was one of the final things to come into the game as a fully fleshed out piece. But an upside of that is we built the map using a lot of tools we already had. For instance, the system that checks which things you haven't talked about, which things you haven't found in the game, use the same variable list as our speech system. So when I was putting this together, I realized, not only can I put a mark down on the map when Henry finds it or talks about it, but I can totally look at the same tools we use for dialogue and figure out what the player said and put it on the map. And the end result felt really natural. I actually wish we'd gone a little deeper on it in the game, but I'm really happy with what's in there right now. Also, please name this shitty boss is going to get me killed, because that's objectively the best name for the hill.
Is that your handwriting?
Yeah, you got to cram that in there, but it's still readable.
It is a hell of a nice camping spot down here by the lake.
I haven't been down there in years, but yeah, Jonesy Lake area is perfect.
Hi, this is Ollie Moss, and I was the art director on Firewatch.
I'm Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Let's talk about this teen
let's
party
talk about
zone.
Let's talk about the Teen Zone. So the Teen Zone is one of the first areas that we used as a sort of art test to see how we would go about building the rest of the game.
We knew from the pretty early on that, on day one, you will start from the tower, and you will have to head down to the lake, and somewhere in between, you will see some teens, and they're partying. And so we called this the teen zone, because this is where all the teen stuff is.
Yeah, and it was important to us that the reveal that it was a group of teens was communicated through the level design. So the idea was that you just kind of walk through some trees and burst out into this scene where a campfire was still burning.
And you had a pretty strong idea of what you wanted to look like.
Yeah, I just wanted to put some big angular rocks in there, which is basically the my modus operandi for the entire game. But we wanted to have a big angular sort of rock, which became known as Pride Rock because it looked so much like the rock from The Lion King.
We did name that Pride Rock, didn't we? That rock does serve as a very strong landmark pretty early in the game, and it kind of does point at the player in the right direction.
Exactly. Should we talk a little bit about our process for designing these areas?
So in the beginning, when we just have no concept art, we will just mock it out with just literally just gray boxes and a gray terrain. And then we will take screenshots and give it to Ollie to be like, please pretty this up, Ollie.
Oh, well, first of all, I'll do a terrible garbage sketch and pitch it to the team. And if people like the gist of it, then we'll go away and do a bit more of a detailed drawing, and then you would go.
Yeah, we'll add in some more shapes. Then we just keep going back and forth with paint overs from Ollie.
And then it's just a sort of tennis, really, just back and forth between the two of us until everyone's happy with what we have.
Yeah.
There are two naked ladies out here.
Can you handle that?
Come on, I like naked ladies, same as anyone, but there's,
My name is Patrick Ewing. I worked on tools and gameplay programming.
The teens, Patrick.
Let's open some old wounds here.
This is like going back to an old battleground and being on these hollowed grounds.
Yeah,
bad
I died on
things
this hill.
happened. I died on this hill.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most complex interactions in the game, if not the most, right?
Yeah.
And it was in the game from the very first vertical slice we did, and then I think we kind of added to it as we played through it and saw we should be able to throw the boombox in the lake, obviously, right? Okay, the teens need to react to the boombox being in the lake. Oh, but then they should also react to you putting it down.
What you should do if you're making a video game is build relatively ironclad, predictable AI and systems that react to inputs. But instead, we built a series of relatively flimsy state machines that were like, if this, but not when, and also if.
Right.
And we're able to create the scene as designed, and Patrick was sort of the shepherd of this scene. So whenever anything would break, if you were to throw the boombox and the teens were not to respond, or you leave with the boombox and they would talk about something else, it was Patrick's job to ferret into the
Right.
state machine and
Right.
figure out what was going on.
Yeah, and I'm happy with how it turned out. There are so many different ways that this scene can play out now, depending on what you choose to do. Do you throw the fireworks at them? Do you talk to them and then start messing up their stuff and throwing it in? And it ends up being pretty like believable. They feel like real characters. It's just such a crazy spaghetti code in the back end that I'm always terrified when I see someone play through it, that there's some interaction that we didn't think about.
Right
Yeah.
now, the player is interacting with the teens in a way that is completely not by the book. And
I mean, luckily we
beads of
haven't.
sweat are building on your brow.
Yeah, I think it's just a PTSD response at this point. We would see the bug reports if this was actually still breakable.
Yeah.
So, I have a bit of a confession to make.
What is it?
Look, I was drunk last night when I welcomed you to the job.
Yeah, well, you're not the first boss to be guilty of that.
I know I can get a little pushy, putting you on the spot about why you're out here and stuff.
Hi, everyone. This is Ben Burbank. I'm a programmer at Campo Santo, predominantly doing graphics work and performance stuff. And I'm here with Jane.
Hi, I'm back.
And we're going to talk a little bit about, in general, how the world sort of streams in. This is a big open world game. There are, tens of thousands of trees somewhere in there?
Yeah, and we have how many chunks of the world that we stream in and out?
There are 100 plus.
Yeah, I think over 120.
One of the big challenges with that was we have to remove parts of it when you're not looking at it, because video game consoles and computers don't like to draw things that aren't seen.
Especially not a lot of trees.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for that little graphics card to do, to try and draw all those that big forest. So the canyon's one of the spots where we have obvious occlusion, where you can't see most of the world. So we unload the tower hub. The tower that you see in the canyon is fake. It's a small fake version.
Yeah.
Which is a common trick.
Yeah, so it's like a very low cost version of what it would actually be there.
One of the biggest challenges for Jane and people building the levels was figuring out line of sight. So how far can you see? If you have a point where you can see entirely across the map, we had to be very careful about what is actually loaded and what's actually drawing.
Yeah, so even though the canyon is pretty much a straight corridor, we had to put in some kinks in there. So, right sort of in the middle, there's a little area where you have to go around a rock. This is so that we could make sure you won't be looking at the lake when we basically delete it out of the world.
Yeah. The game also, it's sort of non-linear. There's a linear story going on, but there's the ability for the player to just go backwards. So we also had to keep in mind reverse line of sight and things like that, which is a little different than a traditional action game or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little puzzle game almost to figure out when we stream in and out things. So hopefully you don't notice any of it, because if you do, that's actually us not doing a great job.
You probably will notice it though sometimes. I'm sorry about that.
Hey, I found a structure that might have been an outhouse once, I think.
Whoa, you don't need my permission to go to the bathroom, but, use abandoned shitters at your own peril.
Anything I should know about the cabin at the top of this hill? Hello? Okay, then. Holy crap, I think I might have just gotten rabies.
Go on.
I'm sniffing around an old lookout and I got attacked by a raccoon.
Did he bite you?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you're probably fine. Wait, is the lookout you're in burned to a crisp and filled with raccoons?
Apparently.
Ooh, Hawk's Rest.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're doing.
What do you mean? I just like to stay out of haunted places myself.
Okay, go on. Out with it.
You want to hear about Raccoon Carter? So, some years ago, way before my time, a man named Winthrop Carter was stationed at Hawk's Rest. He was an angry loner. The story was he lost his life savings betting on horse fights.
Horse fights?
In Mexico. So he did what a lot of us do in times of trouble. He signed up with the Forest Service to watch for fires. His first night in his lookout, there was a break-in, and the break-ins didn't stop. Finally, one night he awoke to find someone in his lookout. He reached for his hand axe and threw it at the figure. And just before the axe killed its target, he heard a small voice cry, "Help!"
What was it?
A raccoon.
Oh, of course.
See, back in these days, the Forest Service wasn't so good about dropping off food and supplies, and, well, Carter was hungry. So he did what anyone would do. He skinned and ate it. Eventually, Carter didn't want to eat anything else. It was raccoons or nothing. But one night, as he sharpened his raccoon blade, there was a scratching at the door. He looked towards it, and again, heard a tiny voice. "Help! Help!" He approached slowly, knife in hand, and ripped the door open. But no one was there. But then, from under the bed, he heard another small voice. "Help! Help!" Carter looked under the bed, and, of course, nothing was there either. So, startled but believing he was just tired, Raccoon Carter went out hunting, and for the first night in months, came up empty. Now, in bed, his stomach rumbling, he hears the voice again. "Help! Help!" And now, he wonders if it's coming from inside of him. But then, a figure appears at the edge of the bed. Again, he reaches for his axe, but in its place is another figure. He looks for the door, and there are more and more figures. Beady, glowing eyes peering out through dark masks. He leaps out of bed, horrified, slips and hits his head. And before he can get up, he feels hundreds of little fingers and razor-sharp teeth digging into his skin. Far away in Bighorn Tower, the lookout reported hearing a voice echoing through the valley. Loud at first, and then smaller and smaller, until they faded away forever. "Help! Help! Help!" And that's the story of Raccoon Carter. His ghost still wanders through the valley, moaning, "Help! Help!" on hot summer nights.
So, if Raccoon Carter died, how do we know this story?
They found his body ripped to shreds by raccoons. And Hawk's Rest was filled to the brim with raccoon pelts. It's probably what caused the fire.
That doesn't make any sense.
Does anything, Henry?